Hi, I'm Jenny Hepler, and welcome to this episode of Connect, the live show that connects your challenges with our solutions. Today, we're talking about the NIST Framework. As we're streaming live today to both LinkedIn and YouTube, please feel free during the show to submit any questions that you might have about NIST in the chat function in either LinkedIn or YouTube. You can also find out more about what we do at APMG on our website at apmg-international.com. And to find out more specifically about NIST, you can just scan the QR code on the screen that you'll see during the show. So let's get started and introduce our guests for today. We have three guests. First is Dave Nichols, the Executive Director of the DVMS Institute. Dave, would you like to say a few words?
Good day, everyone. Glad we can all get together and have this Connect show today. Looking forward to discussing our new book and how we came about to write it.
Great, thank you, Dave. And next we have David Moskowitz, the Executive Director for Content Development at the DVMS Institute. David, would you like to tell the audience a little bit about yourself?
That's a longer story than I think we want to take, but basically I have a military background where we dealt with various aspects of things, and that experience is just translated further into DVMS Institute.
Great, thank you. And we have Brad Laatsch, the North America Education Services Delivery Manager for Hewlett Packard Enterprise. Brad, would you like to say a few words to our audience?
Yes, hello everyone. A pleasure to speak with you today. I'm looking forward to the discussion with all of you. I think we have an interesting perspective kind of coming at this from one of the delivery partners on some of the training on this. So I'm happy to give you some insight into that today.
That's great. Thank you. We're looking forward to that. I think it's going to be a great show today. So with that, I'd like to jump right in and get started with our first question. So this first question is for David. So what is the NIST Cyber Security Framework, and where does it fit into an organization's digital business strategy?
Now, the framework came about because the United States Department of Homeland Security had noticed a radical increase in attempted or breaches at United States critical infrastructure. And as a result of that year-over-year increase, President Obama issued an executive order that directed the National Institutes of Standards and Technology to deal with creating a framework that would help critical infrastructure harden their defenses against cybersecurity attacks. And the basics of the framework provide a risk-based approach that is applicable not just to critical infrastructure in the United States or around the world, but to every business. Because the idea is that what the organization has to be able to do is treat this not as a technical problem, but as a risk-based business problem that is applicable to all organizations, not just critical infrastructure, but also independent of size, so that it works for a one-person organization or a huge multinational corporation, because it provides for what an organization has to do to identify the threat, to protect against the threat, to detect that threat, to respond to the threat, and recover from it. So that those are the four core functions that are inherent in the NIST, and that's applicable to every organization.
Dave, would you like to say something and add to that?
Yeah, one of the things I'd like to point out that David mentioned was the applicability worldwide. We're seeing global adoption of the NIST Cybersecurity Framework in the UK, Australia, New Zealand, Southeast Asia. Um, so it's as David said, it's applicable to a one-person organization, multinational, large organization, small. It was aimed at the what we call mid-sized businesses, $500 million annual revenue and below, 200 to 500 million. That's the kind of the sweet spot in the U.S. Critical sector. Critical sector. So the other thing that I think is critical about the NIST Cybersecurity Framework is it's really easy to understand from a business person's perspective. It's not technical per se, as David pointed out. It really lends itself to the business to look at it and say, yes, this is a good way for us to mitigate our digital risk and a good way for, since it's risk-based, to set our bar for the cybersecurity level that we need for us in particular. It's not a one-size-fits-all. It's not a compliance. It's a risk-based framework.
Right, thank you. So I'd like to go on now to our second question. This one's for David. So why did you write the fundamentals of adopting the NIST Cybersecurity Framework?
The basic, all right, before finally met each other in 2008, we had independently looked at things from a perspective that was broader than most. We didn't necessarily see problems as technical problems. And fade out to our meeting and some of the collaboration that we've done, we did some work on the Resilia product. And because it looked like a way to fit with a whole lot of organizations, but it never really gained the traction that we had anticipated. And our view of cybersecurity was that it wasn't a technical problem, yet that's where a lot of organizations consigned it. And part of what we were trying to do in writing the book was to make it clear that this is a responsibility that starts at the board level, at the most senior management, because as a risk-based framework, it's up to the board, not the IT department, to determine organizational risk. And it's up to the board to determine the tolerances and the risk appetite that they have in terms of what they need to do and how they need to protect their organization. And it's not just a technical protection. It's a protection of reputation. It's a protection of property. In looking at one of the things that last night there was a television show called 60 Minutes in the States. And one of the things that one of the interviewees was Director Wray, who was head of the FBI. And he said that the thing that keeps him up at night are cybersecurity threats, particularly from nation states like China that are stealing U.S. intellectual property. And concern. That's not a technical concern. And the reason that we wrote the book was to try and make it clear that organization has to address this, not the technology department. Any organization is only as secure as its weakest link. And that's just not technology. That can be somebody in HR. It can be somebody in their supply chain that clicks on a link that has access to something. So that it really requires a holistic view of the organization and where it fits in its environment and ecosystem. And it's the whole thing that has to be protected. not just the technology stuff. And what we were trying to do, the central message in the book, that you have to, any value that you create has to be appropriately protected. That this idea of creating and protecting value are two different sides of the same coin. So that the essence of what we're saying is that value that is created without being protected, in a sense, has no value to the consumer because of that lack of protection. And that's the central message that we're trying to get across.
Yeah, I think that's perfect, especially mentioning that it's not just a technical problem for businesses. Dave, what would you like to add to that?
Well, I'd like to go back a little bit further. Before David and I got involved in even discussing writing the book, I had a conversation with a well-known, established cybersecurity expert. And he was talking to me about assessments, and he did assessments, and he was talking to me about how he did them and everything like that. And then at the end of this the conversation, I asked him, okay, once you give your customer the assessment, what happens? And I didn't get a blank stare. He basically shrugged his shoulders. I don't know. Okay. And that's where I kind of saw a disconnect between all of the mechanics of being able to assess your cybersecurity posture with a total lack of understanding of what you had to do to actually do something about mitigating that risk. And my background goes back to after I got out of the service, I worked for a manufacturing company. And in the late 70s, I picked up a book called Quality is Free, written by Philip Crosby. And the basic tenet of that book was that quality is actually free because it costs when your product does not conform to requirements. And it basically says you have to build quality into your product. You cannot audit or inspect a quality in. And shortly after that, in the mid 80s, I crossed over to the dark side, all right, and started managing large scale software development organizations. And that's when I discovered systems thinking, and I applied that and building quality into the product as basically what I did and how I did it for about 11 years in building large scale business applications. Now, as David said, flash forward to 2008. That's when we first met, and I like to say I taught David everything he knows about service management. All right, but I'm just kidding. He was one of my students, but we've collaborated since 2010 on a lot of different projects. And surprisingly, while we have a considerably different background, we've converged over these core concepts of what you do and how you do it. Now, in the context of cybersecurity, the NIST Cybersecurity Framework, as we mentioned, is relatively simple to understand. The devil is in the details. What do you actually have to do organizationally to get ready to go adopt it, which is basically governance? All right. This is what we want to do to mitigate our cybersecurity risk, and then adapting the cybersecurity controls to your particular context, setting your own bar, and then getting over it. We went out there and we looked, and there's nothing really out there at the time, and pretty much still, that really guides an organization to stop, think, and figure out, okay, we're going to go do this. How do we actually go do it? So the guidance in our book, the guidance we tried to make sure we put in the book, is really addresses both from the board level, as David talked about, pretty much down to the individual sitting at their desk in accounting. This is what you need to know about the framework, about adopting it, all right, and the things that you have to do to get your organization ready to adapt its controls to your context.
Yeah, that's such a great answer because I think now so many people are becoming aware of cybersecurity, but there's that gap then. What do they do next? They're aware of it, but how do they actually implement it? So I think this is great that you're here today, all of you, to explain more about how they actually take the next step. So the next question is for Dave. So why did you create the NIST Cybersecurity Certification Training Program?
Well, we created it a while back in conjunction with a university, and the first iteration kind of fell short in our viewpoint of addressing the practical aspects of how do you actually go do this. All right, and this is then when David and I teamed up and wrote the next generation of our NIST Cybersecurity Professional program. Uh, and I've pretty much already answered it. I don't want to, belabor the point. We did it because there's nothing out there that actually teaches an organization what they have to get ready, and actually an approach, all right, to adopting or adapting the controls. It's like eating an elephant. Where do you start? All right. And there wasn't anything out there that says, eat here first. Okay. And so that was the thrust of both the foundation and the subsequent practitioner and specialist courses, where we take them on this journey from digital business awareness, all right, all the way through to understanding the specifics of adapting an informative reference to their context.
And David, do you have something to add to that?
Yeah, one of the things that, as part of creating the course, particularly the practitioner course, it's exercise based. So that while there's a lot about the theory behind the right way for an organization to do things, we actually break it down into phases that any organization can follow. But the other side of that is that it's not just an instructor lecturing. There's also practical exercises that the attendees, the students, get a chance to play with, to solve a problem for a fictional company, ABC Financial, and that exercises build as they go through the course to hopefully try and provide one or more aha moments in terms of this is how we do it in real life. And that was critical to both Dave and I, that it wasn't just about providing the theoretical basis. We also had to provide a practical approach that enabled the student to translate it into something actionable when they got back to work.
Yeah, thank you. That's so important. Then they have that to take away from the course, and actually apply it to their own jobs and companies as well. Speaking of which, so our next question is for Brad. So what attracted HPE to the DVMS Institute and its NIST Cybersecurity Professional program?
Well, thanks for that question, Jenny. Actually, it's a three-part answer. The first part of that is that at HP we had been making a strong push toward an as-a-service type of approach in digital transformations models, such as our Green Lake offering. And as part of that, we try to integrate into the overall picture and story within HPE. And so we already had strong linkages and a pretty strong security consulting group, which has seen a lot of this firsthand as to it is not a technology problem to just solve. It is not understanding the risk and mitigating that and have the governance for that. So we really saw this as a strong solution to that. The second part of it is that like both Dave David's here. I certainly come from, and I manage a team that has a vast amount of service management experience with ITIL. And so with the instructor base that I had, 25 plus years for each of them in that area, this again made this a natural fit for our education offering. It really was the most structured approach that we had seen to this area. And as Dave also mentioned before, in the Resilia aspect of things, we just weren't seeing the uptake there in this. So this was a welcome change. And then finally, I would say Dave also talked about the origins of where this came out of, and where the Obama administration had put forth the effort to get this rolling. And when we also started seeing that it was the government sector, certainly is something we play in, but when we saw that, as Dave pointed out, going not only internationally, but also into the different marketing verticals that were out there, it again provided us a really good opportunity to try to explore those different areas and bring that to our customers. So those are the three main reasons that we decided that this was something we should definitely be pursuing as an additional portfolio in our education practice.
That's great. Thank you. So let's go on to our next question for Dave. So why is cybersecurity a business opportunity and not a business problem?
Okay. So we don't explode any heads. As David pointed out, it's not cybersecurity is not an IT problem, and our approach is that cybersecurity isn't a problem at all. It's a business opportunity. And if you go back to what I said earlier about Cosby's quality is free, that's the approach we're taking with our approach to this. Is that the organization first has to understand that it's their primary role to create value for their stakeholders, and value without any protection doesn't have actually any value. So the paradigm has to shift from creation of value to creation and protection and delivery of that value. Once you change that mindset, then the rest of it kind of falls into place, because at the board level, they set the rules, they set the goals, and the organization effectively organizes around it. It achieves those things. And that if you look at cybersecurity as an opportunity to increase the quality of the value that your organization is creating, it's a natural fit. Okay, there's probably a number of large retailers that wish that had a tagline: "We'll keep people from stealing your personal information." All right, the whole idea of quality, all right, and its connectivity with, or its connectedness to cybersecurity is one that we're starting to actually see a trend in industry. So particularly among larger organizations, they're starting to get it. All right, that they're baking cybersecurity into the services and products that they create. So to me, it's a natural fit. And we have a tendency to have a knee-jerk reaction to say, well, the cybersecurity problem. All right, and we're trying to change that knee-jerk reaction to, we have a cybersecurity opportunity here. Let's look at it and let's take it.
Yeah, I agree. I think that's an excellent way to explain it and to put it. David, did you have something to add to that question?
Yeah, just real quick. And Dave and I have alluded to it. The issue of create and protect value doesn't double the cost. It's a very slight incremental increase, so that from our perspective, pardon me, it's not so much that quality is free in the sense that it costs nothing extra, but the small incremental cost pays a huge dividend, because now what the organization does, it changes its mindset. And the mindset is not just what do we do to create value, but rather quality is inherent in creating and the incremental cost to protect it. If you deal with a technical problem having nothing to do with cybersecurity, there's the classic that if you catch it at the specification stage, it costs less than if you go to requirements. Catch it at requirements, it costs less than if you go to design, code, and test. The further down the line that you catch something, the more point that was a 10x multiplier. All right. It's not today, but it's still, whether it's 10,000 times more to fix it more, the incremental cost to protect it up front is minimal by comparison. And look at what the organization gains in terms of its ability to respond, because the threat landscape is extraordinarily dynamic and very fast moving.
Yeah, agreed. I just want to take this opportunity before we go on to the next question, just to remind our live viewers right now that if you do have a question that you'd like to submit to the panel, please feel free to put it into the chat function in either YouTube or LinkedIn if you're watching. And as long as we have some time at the end of the show, we'll try and get to all of your questions. So our next question is for Dave. So why does cybersecurity risk management need to be part of an organization's digital business strategy?
That's an excellent question. Let's go back to my previous answer about cybersecurity not being a problem. It's an opportunity, and it's definitely not an IT problem. All right. You need to look at cybersecurity risk management in the larger context of the entire organization's risk strategy, enterprise risk management, ERM framework. How do we manage risk across the entire organization? Well, it should be apparent to almost anybody that owns an iPhone or Android or has a tablet or PC, laptop, connects to the office from home. COVID's been caused a lot of consternation, as well as the new normal of living on Zoom. So the idea that cyber risk is something separate from organizational risk is nonsense. All right. The organization's dependency on their digital assets. We've gone from horse and buggy to the industrial age to now the digital age, where almost the entire organization is dependent on their digital assets, and this also extends to the physical protection of their digital assets as well as their physical plant per se. We have the Internet of Things. We have robots. We have that you can access from your iPhone sitting halfway across the world. So the idea that cyber risk management is something that, again, is an IT problem is nonsense. It's got to be part of the organization's risk management perspective. In fact, what we've done is we've actually, in our model, in our CPD model, create, protect, and deliver model, which is an abstraction of a complex adaptive system, we have created a construct called strategy risk, which the model actually works under the assumption that we have a risk-informed strategy in the formulation of all our business objective and all the subsequent policies that flow out of those.
Great, thank you. I'd like to move on to our next question, is for David. So why is it essential to take a whole organization or a systems view of cybersecurity?
This is something that we've sort of been dancing around for most of the show. if you view an organization as Dave just alluded to, a complex adaptive system, in that it lives in an environment, it lives in its own ecosystem with a supply chain, supply network, etc., then everything that happens, it's not the sum of its parts that makes the thing successful. It's the synergism and interconnections between the parts that make things work. So a systems view says that whatever this entity is, this system is, what it does, what it produces, its purpose for being is not based upon the sum of its parts, but rather the product of the interactions between those parts. And the issue here is that if you take the approach that cybersecurity is a technical problem, then what you're trying to do is look at the organization through a straw. The only thing you see is the technical challenge. What you don't see is everything that's going on in the organization. It's the HR person, the person in finance, the person in purchasing. Any of them can click on a link, and if they're not, as Dave said, the single entity that we call strategy risk, it's what we're trying to do is deal with a different mindset. Think differently about the organization and cybersecurity position within it. It starts at the board. You need the appropriate level of governance. You need an appropriate level of assurance to know that the governance policies are actually being executed the way you intend. You need to, pardon me, you need to be able to look at this from a holistic perspective, the whole organization perspective, and its supply chain, not just the IT department, so that everything is operating within an environment where everything has to work together. And if you don't take a whole systems approach, then what you're dealing with is allowing, in effect, you're creating a vulnerability for yourself if you don't take a systems view. Because as I said, anybody can click on a link. Anybody can be the weakest link, and everybody has to be involved in a culture, if you will, where the messenger, particularly about cybersecurity, is encouraged and trained so that they can identify what's going on, pardon me, and appropriately reported. And they're going to get, an atta-person, atta-boy, atta-girl, as opposed to either being ignored or shot. And that only happens in a whole systems view where everybody's working together toward the same goal to create and protect digital business value.
Yeah, I think that's a great overview. Dave, did you have something to add to that?
Yeah, I'd like to point out something. As David pointed out, by taking the whole view, all right, you've got the entire organization in your head, all right, and all of the things the organization is doing, and so on and so forth. One of the biggest problems we've run across in talking to people about this is, as David alluded, it's not a technical problem. Period. It's not. Okay, and people try to take this thing apart, and as if they can take the subsystem associated with their technical management of their digital assets, and it's going to work the same way, all right, and display the same behaviors as if it were still part of the organization. It doesn't. All right, you take any part of a complex adaptive system apart, not to go totally geek on you, all right, and you can't predict how it's going to perform. And if you try to fix it at that level, it's a euphemistic term we use, you're pushing a rope up a hill. All right, it doesn't work. All right, you've got to keep the entire organization inside your head as you approach a whole organization. And David used an excellent term, establishing a cybersecurity culture within your organization.
Yeah, that's very important. Thank you for that. So let's go on to our next question. This one is for Brad. So how has HPE adopted the NIST framework internally? And what is it doing to help its clients to do the same?
Great question. So obviously for years, we've been talking about this really not being a technical problem. For years, the NIST control points have been embedded on our hardware technology. We're a hardware a company for sure. But again, I think we've stated, and it's a well-known fact for many years, that if you just rely on the technology to solve all the problems, as we've talked about here today, that's not going to get you where you need to be. There's the whole people factor of things. There's bad process that ends up happening, and I think that's where we can really help things not only internally in HPE, but for our customers. I had mentioned that we had been making this transformation to a managed service type of an approach. We do have an offering we refer to as GreenLake, as managed services, and we can do that for a customer. We can manage their entire environment all the way through, or they can do some of it. But an interesting thing started showing up here when our teams were working with customers on establishing the requirements for that. We discovered that internally, some of our team, account service managers, solution architects, didn't have that background in really getting at the requirements with our customers and understanding things from their business standpoint. What are the risks associated in their business verticals? They had trouble with that, so we immediately jumped on that internally to develop an upskilling approach with the internal teams to prepare them, both with the type of training that we have to offer, as well as, quite frankly, ITIL for service management type of training to give them that experience. What we also discovered as we got those consultants up to speed with that there had been definitely a gap in our customer base with that type of thing. So it's a natural progression here to get our people up to speed to help our customers out, but also gives us a window in preparing that environment culturally at the customer side, so that when our folks are defining what level of services are needed, that they can participate in that discussion from a knowledgeable standpoint. So, we're excited where that is actually going to end up going to provide, us the types of training opportunities and things like that that we look forward to with our customers. But it was an interesting thing that when we saw that actually occur. So it was good. It was very good timing for that within HPE.
That's great. Thank you. So I'd like to ask another question of David. So, what types of changes must an organization make to create and protect the delivery of digital business value?
If I look back at what we've talked about for the last 35, 40 minutes or so, I think that the single most important change is not a technology change. It's an organizational change that starts at the top. Satya Nadella, the CEO of Microsoft, wrote a book called Hit Refresh. And he talks in that book about the Microsoft board's decision to pick him as the next CEO of the corporation. And he said he realized at that time that his primary job was less to be the chief executive officer of Microsoft and more to be the chief curator so that the changes that have to be made don't start at the technology level. They start, said explicitly, and we talked about earlier, this notion of a culture of cybersecurity where everybody is encouraged, trained, can recognize what's going on, recognize that there is something suspicious, raise it, and know that they're not going to get either ignored or worse, penalized for raising the issue. And because ultimately, cybersecurity is everybody's responsibility. At work, at home. I mean, if somebody has today, a computer at home that doesn't have antivirus software on it, or doing something to protect themselves and their family, I mean, within limits, I think Darwin was right. Survival of the fittest, and they give Darwin awards for. But the issue here is the primary change is to think differently, and the concrete thing. I mean, it's difficult to change organizational culture, but the concrete thing that an organization can do is start with the recognition that any value that we create has to be appropriately protected, starting at the inception of that value creation point. It's not something that you do in testing. It's not something that you do in coding. It's something that starts at the very beginning. If this is what we're going to do, how do we protect it? If this is what we're going to provide the customer, how do we make sure that it's appropriately protected so that the customer, the consumer, gets the expected protected value out of what it is that we're trying to do? So that it starts with a mission statement that says anything that we create, we have to appropriately protect, starting at the very onset of whatever it is that we're doing.
Yeah, thank you. That's a great answer. And I think it's important what you said, that it's really affecting everybody in an organization. It's not just one or two departments as well. It's everyone in an organization as well as at home. Dave, do you have something to add to that?
Yeah, just really quick. As David pointed out, one of the things I would like to mention to anybody sitting in the audience and saying, "Well, this is really cool. How do I get my board to go do that?" Well, you don't. You need to you need to start making people aware of what the issues are and that there are solutions out there that might be appropriate for the organization. The caution that I'd like to point out is don't try to turn this into the flavor of the month. People will blow it off, and people in organizations are pretty used to understanding and picking up very, very early when it's one of these programs. If I ignore it long enough, it's going to go away. This has to start at the top, and the board, the C-suite, senior management, they not only talk the talk, they have to walk the walk. They have to live it, breathe it, and make it work. It has to permeate the entire organization. All right, and the idea that they start with value, protect that value, deliver the value to their stakeholders. All right, and they basically push this down through the organization. Now it's implemented at the bottom. All right, but it starts at the top and lives at the top.
Exactly. So Dave, what do you see is next?
Well, we have a whole bunch of things. What's next? All right. Well, in a few days, I hope we're going to turn in the manuscript for our second book. That's the Practitioner's Guide to Adapting the NIST Cybersecurity Framework. That's where we get into the nitty gritty of how practitioners would, within the context of their existing underlying systems, how would they go about understanding and integrating the NIST Cybersecurity controls, framework controls into their organization's underlying systems. That's what's next. We've got a couple things that we're straying off in partnering with some people. I can't talk exactly about what's going on, but it will touch on the cultural aspects of cybersecurity. And our third book is called Living on the Edge of Chaos, which is aimed at the leadership of an organization that will be basically running the program that they would put together in order to adopt the framework and then subsequently adapt it to their context. And then later on, we've got a whole bunch of things that I'll let David talk about the institute and where we're going with the DVMS. It's based on the third book, and he can tell you a little bit about what the institute's planning on.
Great. David, do you want to add to what's next?
Sure. One of the things that we did real quickly, we have sort of a systems roadmap, if you will, of what we're doing. Mm-hmm. The fundamentals book is first. That's the one that's out now. The practitioner book is the one that we're working on, and I hope to finish stitching all that together within the next few days. But part of what we lay out in the practitioner book is this notion of a practical guide to making this stuff actionable in the organization. So that we talk about the right level of mentorship, that quality is almost free if you do it incrementally. How to deal with looking at a system and leveraging the aspects of a system to improve that system in a way that's going to be sticky and not, as Dave alluded to, the flavor of the month or the week or the day. I mean, this isn't a silver bullet. The other thing that we're looking at in terms of the way that we're crafting this, the DVMS, the Digital Value Management System, which is the namesake, if you will, of the company, is all about a minimum viable set of capabilities that overlay any organization, whether it's one person or a million people, multinational. It's not a one-size-fits-all. As an overlay, you take it and you adapt the portions of it that are relevant to your business. But it's a cohesive model that provides a roadmap so as the one person, if you will, Apple or Microsoft Corporation in its infancy, with either the two Steves or Bill and Paul Allen, as they grow into huge multinationals, scales with them as they grow their organizations. And the idea behind it is that there are minimum organization has to have. It needs the ability to govern and assure that it's doing the right things. It needs to be able to plan. It needs to be able to design and create and protect value. It needs to be able to make changes. It needs to be able to execute on its model, and it needs to be able to innovate or improve what it's doing. So that we're going to deal with elaborating on each of those areas as we round out a book series that looks at cybersecurity, looks at business, looks at what the business has to do to deal with governance and assurance. What does the business have to do to really approach planning that integrates this idea of create and protect digital business value? How does it design what it's doing to create and protect? And if this begins to sound redundant, it's because once you deal with it at the governance strategy risk level, it cascades through. How do we plan to create and protect? How do we design to create and protect? How do we change to create and protect? How do we execute to create and protect? How do we innovate to create and protect? So that the new mantra what's next is a new way of thinking about the organization. It's about thinking that value created that isn't appropriately protected has no value, period.
Great, thank you. I think we'll be looking forward to that. We do have a live question that's come in that I'd like to put to the panel. Are there any plans to expand the framework to operational resilience? Dave?
The very nature of what David just talked about, we enable an organization to be digital risk aware and adaptive, and that being an adaptive organization, all right, that works in this environment by its very nature is a resilient organization. All right, David, if could probably expand on that a little bit more.
David?
Sure. Part of what we're looking at, if you look at this entire model that we put together, resilience is baked in. All right. And we changed the classic service management talks about continual service improvement. And what we're doing is saying in a cybersecurity world where things are moving that quickly, that isn't sufficient to cover the broad base of stuff that we're dealing with. So we change it from innovation, aspects of innovation. Incremental is the stuff you do every day to keep the lights on. Sustaining are the slightly bigger changes that you deal with version of something. But if you're creating and protecting value, you're building into it. Part of what you have to do is ask the question, what do we do if somebody gets this, breaks this, copies this, does something with it? Because that's part of what it takes to protect value. The other two aspects of innovation address adaptive innovation, which causes a change to policy within the organization, and disruptive innovation, which causes a change to strategy. But baked into all of this is the idea that the reason that we dealt with create and protect value is to include the idea of resilience as part of what you have to do to protect. All right.
Yeah.
It's not just about putting up the burglar alarm, if you will. It's about having the right set of camera systems, the right set of backup systems. I mean, if you don't create value that you're creating that you're not backing up, having nothing to do with cybersecurity, if something happens and you can't restore it, then you've got the problem. So the idea of resiliency is actually baked into the overall model.
Yeah, exactly. Thank you. Does anybody else want to add anything to that last question? No? Okay. Well, I'd like to say a special thank you to our panel today for joining us. I think this information was great for our audience. And we had a live question. Thank you for answering that as well. So thank you to the audience for watching today. Don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel and also to follow APMG on LinkedIn. And you can stay up to date with our latest news and our Connect episodes. If you are interested in the fundamentals of adopting the NIST Cybersecurity Framework, just scan the QR code that you're seeing on the screen right now. And next time we'll be talking about XLA Collab, experience level agreements. Thank you and see you then.